So, as we wrap up our series on community, we're going to talk a little bit about how we ought to treat one another. Now, I know that can be a pretty spicy conversation because some of you have probably been mistreated by others in your community. Well, tonight we're going to attack some of that and see what we can do to help you have a great experience in your communities. Next on Bible Bros and Brew. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Bible Bros and Brew. I'm David. With me, as usual, is Philip, and we've got the illustrious Lynn Nestor with us today, our Bible Broette. And we are so glad that you guys have joined us for another episode. You know, we've been talking a good deal about community now for this will be the 8th episode, and we've enjoyed digging into that. And as we wrap up our first foray into talking about community, it won't be our last. We're going to talk a little bit about our relationship within the community and some things that we should be considering and looking at and looking for. But before we jump into that and start talking about it in detail, let's jump into our cups and let's find out what's in the cup. So, Philip, I'm going to start with you. What's in your cup tonight?
Man, special delivery. This actually arrived from Peregrine Roasters today. This is a new one that just put out, and it's actually called something I think you'll appreciate, David. It's called Blockchain. So the story behind it is there's a gentleman named Jason Casper who's a big crypto guy. He's a crypto trader. He's kind of heavy in that world, and he kind of partnered with the gentleman who runs Peregrine, and they have like a thing where were able to source some coffee from Sumatra. So this is a Sumatran coffee. It's got cocoa, molasses, and vanilla notes. It is so good. It is amazing. So shout out to Peregrine once again for another banger. Appreciate all you do.
For another banger. Things you never expected to hear about your coffee that now you have and you can't take it back.
Exactly.
Lynn, what's in the cup?
In the cup today is tea. It's summertime and I'm loving peaches. So I thought peach tea would be appropriate.
Beautiful.
Lee went the tea brew route. Nicely done. And then, let's see. Me, what's in my cup? I'm glad you've asked. Tonight, I am drinking a K-Cup from Green Mountain. It's called Cinnamon Sugar Cookie.
Ooh.
And let's just say when I came across it, it was like, look, I just need something right now, so let's just get through this. And it has turned out to be my 4-day favorite right now. I've had it every day for the last couple of days. So it's got nice, strong hints of cinnamon, and there is that sugar cookie element. You can taste it in there, so it's quite nice, and I would recommend it to all of you who are looking for something other than Peregrine. Just kidding. We love Peregrine here.
Yeah.
So there you go. So that is what's in the cup. So let's get back into our conversation that we've been having about community. Over the last few weeks, especially when we started a couple of weeks back, we kind of lingered in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and Romans chapter 12, where we talked about several things, including that even though we be many parts, it's still one body. We talked about how it's the same Spirit that gives gifts. We talked about how, there is administration of gifts. There are administrative gifts, there are spiritual gifts, there are operational gifts that are at work for the sake of community. Then we moved into Ephesians chapter 4, where we saw that there were gifts given to help us to mature, and that really that's the purpose of community. The purpose of community is to help us mature as believers. And so until we come, as Ephesians 4, I think it's maybe 12, 13, somewhere around there, says till we come into a perfect man and we're not tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine. So our push is to continue to mature. Well, one of the questions we had last week, if you listened to the last episode, was it talked about how do you deal with church hurt while you're also trying to grow in community. And I think that leads us into a conversation that really talks a little bit more about how we ought to care for, love, and treat one another, and how we as believers ought to approach community for the health and the well being of everybody involved. And really, even more pressing than that, that we do it the way that God intended for us to do it. Because if we do it the way that God intends for us to do it, then that means we're going to get the right benefits and the right outcomes from community. And I'm glad to be having this conversation with people in my community because Philip and Lynn are we're family. You know, this is community. John's in the background. He's family too. And we see ourselves as a community, even though we have a gap of a state or so between us. We still know that there is the ability to count on one another, to be able to trust one another, and so much more. So, how is it that the believer is to govern themselves in community? Philip, any thoughts as we kind of wrap into this last portion for this part?
Well, I think one of the places we can start is to mention Romans 15. I think we've mentioned it before in a previous episode, but it's a good place to kind of kick off and talk about how we're to conduct ourselves among believers. And it's interesting because this verse comes on the heels of Romans 14, where Paul spent a lot of time talking about the different nuances to personal conviction. He was talking about, how some folks believe it's okay to eat veggies only. Other people think, hey, meat and vegetables, no problem. Some people want to worship on a given day and think that it's more holy than another day. All these different things like that. The main thing he stressed was we should strive to edify each other and not tear each other down in our personal convictions. And we should not try to put all our personal convictions off on others in matters like that. But in the overall summary, Paul said, as long as you're serving the Lord in righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Ghost, you're doing good. Everything's okay. And so from that whole summary in Romans 14, we come into this verse in Romans 15, verse 1. He says, we who are strong, and he's talking about those who have matured in the faith a little more, those who have kind of been trained in the word to have their senses exercised a little more. We who are strong must be considerate of those who are sensitive about things like this. Mm-hmm. You've got a guy who's uneasy about, I've always fasted on Thursdays, and what if I miss one? That kind of thing. It's like, number one, the world's not going to fall apart. I promise that. But different things like that. He said, those of us who are strong should be considerate of those who are sensitive about things like this, and we must not just please ourselves. And then verse 2, it says, we should help others do what is right and build them up in the Lord. It's interesting that his whole focus was how you're conducting yourself in light of other people. And there seems to be in society today, this whole idea of, I'm going to do me. Hey, look, I got to be myself. I got to keep it real, this, that, and the other. And quite honestly, it's a selfish approach to life because you're like, I don't care what I say, what I do. If it hurts other people or whatever, I can't help that. That's your problem. And you're creating collateral damage all over the place by the way you act and you say. And to me, that is not what Paul is emphasizing here in Romans 15. He's like, there does come this point where yes, you can yourself in the Lord, but at the same time, you have to consider one another. I think it's only right and godly because we're talking about being in the body of Christ. And that means what you do, it doesn't just affect you, it also affects others as well.
I agree with what you're saying, Phil. That part, especially where you were saying, I'm going to do me. And I think we reflect the same kind of selfishness in the Christian community when we say, you do you. There's an element of isolationism that we pride ourselves on. And I think that that's a detriment to all of us as believers. When I was reading in Acts as we were talking about it, and I was looking at chapter 4 most recently, and Peter and John are defending themselves and what they said. Then they began to understand the effect Jesus had on them simply by spending time with him. And I think that a lot of times we as Christians don't spend the time with Jesus that we need to spend in order to behave like Jesus. And the NIV version said they knew they were with him. And, to me, being with somebody, I can just be walking down the street and have no relationship with you. I'm with you. We're walking down the street. We're not talking. But where this version says spent time with him and got to know him, and that set up the community that was in the early church in Acts. And it says in 4:32 and 33, with 32, all believers were of one mind and heart. Selfishness was not a part of their community. And I think that's what you're talking about, is selfishness, by what you just finished saying.
Yeah.
I also read a thing about my utmost for his highest. And Oswald Chambers wrote roughly 100 years ago some of the things I'm reading. I'm like, that is so fitting for today. When he was talking about Jesus did not trust himself to men, but that wasn't a negative statement in the realm of the word disillusionment. And I mean, really, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you say you're disillusioned with someone? We translate to disappointed.
Yeah.
But godly disillusionment means we had no expectations of them, that we just accepted them the way they were, as they were, in the weaknesses that you were talking about. This person says it's okay to eat meat. This person says it's not. That person says you've got to worship on this day. Those are the things that we create parameters in our religion that sort of gate us away from other people and fence us away from other people. When if we could take the kind of disillusionment that is a godly disillusionment, we would say, okay, so you believe that way. I'm not going to be offended. You're my brother, you're my sister, and I love you where you are. And that allows us to be the Colossians 2 woman, for me, that I can mentor people. If I don't think, well, they've got to do this and they've got to act that way and they must say this a certain way, if I can drop those concepts, I have a better chance of living like Jesus did and creating the community that he did. When we talk about the 120 in the upper room and then the 70 that were there, that went out when Jesus sent them out, when they were replacing Judas as a disciple, one of the criteria was he must be a person who's been with us from the beginning, someone they had had community with all of those years. And you knew and accepted each other the way you were. I mean, when you think about Matthew, the tax collector, and Peter, the fisherman, nothing in common there, other than they probably hated each other had it not been for Jesus's influence on them. So I think for us in community, we need to spend a long time with Jesus so that he rubs off on us to a point that we can rub Jesus off onto others and not have an expectation of who they should or should not be.
Good stuff, Lynn.
Good, because you're saying that, it made me think of what Romans 15 says, or maybe it's 15 or 14, where it says, "Who are you to judge another man's servant?" Right? Which means that, first of all, it's more evidence that as believers, it is not our job to necessarily judge those within the body or outside of the body. But anyway, um, when people are doing what they believe the Lord has got them doing, I often ask myself, well, who am I to tell them they're wrong? Because what they may be doing, the Lord may. Now, that doesn't mean sin. You can't tell me you're out here fornicating and saying the Lord told you to do that. You're not going to convince me that that's right. But if you say to me, I'm a vegan, and that's what I believe the Lord has for me, I can't sit here and tell you that's not what the Lord has for you. So it's not for me to judge you concerning that thing. It is, well, I guess if we're going to lunch, then I'm a vegan too. Right, and that's all for the benefit of others. And I think that's kind of the overarching theme here is that true Christianity, true community looks to what's convenient for my brothers and sisters first over what's important for me or what I desire for self. And when you come to it from that perspective, I think that the beautiful thing that happens is that you start connecting with other believers who are feeling the same way about you. And you don't have to worry about your needs being met because God meets your needs, and they don't have to worry about their needs being met because God meets their needs through you and you through them. And it creates that symbiotic. Yes, I didn't want to use symbiotic because I didn't want people thinking about parasites, but it feels symbiotic in our relationship to one another, and that makes for good community. Good stuff. It makes for a huge good community. And I also think, if that is the principle that you start with, then it makes so many of the other principles in community so much easier to function, because you're starting off thinking about, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to do for others, and I'm not going to think of myself first. That's a heck of a good place to start with. So which would lead me to ask the question, why do we struggle to start from that place?
So many factors that can play. I think a lot of it has to do with our personal experiences, the kind of upbringing we had, childhood that we had, things that had a bearing on how we see the world. All of us have, to some degree, a lens through which we see the world. Whether we think we got it or not, it's there. And a lot of times the lens is shaped by our experiences. And so I think that when you come into the things of God, you start learning about what God says about this, that, or the other thing. You have to kind of lay those perceptions on the altar, if you want to call it that, where you have to start, striving to see things the way God sees them and see people the way God sees them. And that's one of the toughest things to do, especially if you grew up in a household where you heard certain things about certain types of people, some of which may have been horrible or negative. My wife talks a lot about, in her household and extended family, a lot of times she would hear all men are dogs, all men cheat, things like that. And that was kind of the thing that, was just heard here, there, and everywhere. And so it's one of those things that you got to be careful. If you take that in and that becomes a part of your thinking, you're automatically starting off at a place of distrust, in a relationship and things like that. Thank God she didn't do me that way, but I just want to point that out. But different things like that can have a bearing on your ability to open up, to be more selfless, and to give of yourself, because most of us, we're hesitant to do that type of thing when we think we might get hurt. I think the fear of getting hurt in one way or the other also stops us a lot of times.
What about you, Lynn? What do you think?
I don't think that I could say it much better than what Philip did. I think the things that we grow up with shape us. We don't think it, we've been shaped. We think everybody thinks like we do. And when we find out somebody doesn't, I think it takes us aback for a minute because we don't really know how to deal with that. I think too that some of what stops us is a lot of the social media and things that we're seeing. I know that every time I pull up a browser and, it's got the scrolling news of all the different things, millennials say this, boomers believe this, and there's a constant sowing of discord and discontent.
Yes.
Between so many kinds of groups of people. And if that's where your news source comes from, if that's where your source comes from, if you're taking your source from this world, it's going to be a lot harder than those of us who choose to be with Jesus as our source and then look at this and see it for what it is. So I think that it's our upbringing and how we choose to accept a lot of things and how much of the things around us we're willing to look at, because sometimes I see things that I agree with, but I have to look at that critically and say, is that true?
Mm-hmm.
Some things I don't agree with, and I immediately say, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to look at that and say, okay, God, what part of it is true? Because we know that Satan tends to tell partial truths.
Mm-hmm.
In everything you hear, I mean, it started with Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Did God really say? And there was a half of it in there that was right. So whatever I look at, I need to ask God, what is the truth of this matter and what really is not? And what am I supposed to think or do about it? And I find I'm too reactionary, which could put people off, could keep me from going to people. I'm also, the way I was raised was very limited in showing emotion. So I might withhold myself sometimes when somebody's crying because really I don't know what to do with it. So sometimes I think it's ignorance. I think there's so many things that feed into that.
It's really good. We have a dilemma in our world today of lies and untruths that really do shape how we see and feel about one another. And please allow me to take a conspiracy theorist left here, but it's intentional. I believe that it's intentionally designed to drive wedges between us in all the possible ways that it can, because if there are wedges between us, then we'll never come together and figure out the truth together. Because if we ever find out the truth together, then you'll never be able to separate us again.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
So you've got men separated from women. You've got generations separated from generations. Then you start creating categories of people that never existed before. And then, look, they're even at war with one another.
Yes.
And, it's parents against children. It's children against, it's first against seconds. And nobody likes the third. And it's all of this division and separation that's designed to do us harm. Mm-hmm. And we come to community with all of that stuff in our minds, and then we're left to part of the maturing process is we have to begin to sort that stuff out.
I want to jump in there. This past summer, John and I joined a small group in our church, and it was on marriage and, take every opportunity you can to improve your marriage and your communication. So we took that, and by far we were the oldest couple there. One was a newlywed in their very early 20s. But we found ourselves falling in love with this small group and staying on for all of it. It's multicultural, multi-age. But what we're learning is how much we really love the intergenerational portion of this and how little difference there really is between it. And I know a lot of places where you go, you've got your children's church, your youth, then you've got young married, then you've got young single, then you've got till you get on up to the joy class because that's the oldest group that you can be in. And it's just sort of the way it's put together because everyone thinks like-minded is, I guess, age related. I don't know. But this has been such an eye-opening experience being a part of young people. We went out to an Ethiopian restaurant, not something I would have ever thought about doing. And there were about 11 or 12 of us that were there. We got to the restaurant at 5 o'clock and left at 9:30 because we so enjoyed the experience of being together and talking and communing around the table. And I just wish that we had more opportunities to do that than just here and there and occasionally.
When we are doing community the way that it should be, we should be regularly doing those kinds of things together. We should regularly take opportunity to connect with one another, and as it said, to break bread and to pray for one another and talk about the word and to encourage and love one another. That's really what community is all about. It's a foundational group of people that's designed to help keep you lifted when things get tough and to help everybody keep moving forward. I mean, it doesn't, again, it's like you said, when you're describing that, it's like it, at that moment, it couldn't have gotten better. And I think that's what community should be for everyone. A series of moments that just couldn't get any better because we were one and we just had everything common and there was nothing lacking, nothing missing. Nobody needed anything at that time except to just share in this fellowship with one another. I think the other thing that's important to note is that community, and I think we've almost talked a little bit more about what community isn't. Community is not just going and hanging out on a Friday night or something like that. That could definitely be part of a community. But community is something that happens when even, oddly enough, I think I talk to Lynn almost every day. Now, we also work together. So if we didn't work together, I don't know that we would talk every day, but we talk regularly. I talk to Phil every day or so, or a couple of days. We may go a little bit longer period of time because Philip's in North Carolina, a place he's not supposed to be. Just kidding. He should be with us. But we connect. So being in community means being connected with people regularly, not just once or twice. What's your thought on that, Philip?
I think that connection, in terms of, it doesn't always have to be a physical gathering. It's important definitely to have those times. And I think I may have mentioned this in a previous episode when my wife and I were back in Georgia, part of a group that met every Saturday evening. It was called NOF, N-O-F, Night of Fellowship. And we had folks from, many different churches, honestly, or some who didn't have any other church except they only had that small group that met on Saturday evenings. And those gatherings were awesome, but there was also the connection that happened between the gatherings where you call and check up on somebody, or somebody just send you a text midway through the week. Hope you're doing well. Hope the family's good. Praying for you guys, whatever, things like that. You felt that sense of connection, that sense of, hey, I've got their back, they've got my back. And you would know that if anything came up where you needed some folks who were full of faith who could pray for a situation, all you had to do was put that text out into the group text or whatever, and they'd be the first to pray and drop whatever they're doing and help however they could, that type of thing. It's valuable. It's valuable to have that. And it's also rare sometimes, because unfortunately, you do have folks who come in more for what they can get versus what they can give.
Mhm.
And you have, those things you have to deal with as well sometimes. But at the end of the day, I can say that on the balance, our experience in that group was far more. It was 99% awesome, 1% okay, everything else. So the price you might pay in terms of having to deal with those little bobbles and turbulence is worth it for the benefit you get out of it. And at the end of the day, man, God's the author of it all anyway. So it was a blessing and continues to be a blessing for the people we've stayed in touch with, for sure.
And let me add,
Oh, go ahead, Lynn.
I just wanted to say that community is modeled, because I look at both of your families and I dearly love both of your wives. Your kids are amazing, but your kids, what I find, reach out and they love well too. That's not something they would have learned had it not been modeled by their parents. So to me, community is not only something that you choose to do, it's something that you model and others emulate. So you started it in your families, which makes the community grow even bigger for you and for me, because we're friends with you. And because of that, I've got the extended family or the extended community of yours, because you've chosen to model that in your own lives.
That's good stuff. I like that, Lynn.
A quick tip. Here's a quick community tip. In our day of technology and all that good stuff, have a text group. I don't know how many times, and I feel like I'm leading the way in this, and now it makes me say I need to pray some more. But I'm always like, hey, pray for such and such a situation. Hey, need y'all to pray for Lori. Need y'all to pray on this. Well, at least I've been leading the way right now. Just because, but I looked at my community and Lynn and Philip and others, to pray for us to pray for them. Even in my own personal prayer time, I pray for these people because I want God to bless them and do well by them. Because we have some similar skill sets, I also look for work opportunities, because if I go up, there's nobody else I'd rather go up with than these guys. Anytime we throw a party, who do I have invited on my list right from the beginning? It's these guys, because of all the people out there that I would want to spend my time with, it would be this group. So start your community and don't let the Bible says, though your beginnings be small, your latter end shall greatly increase. Don't let the fact that you might have a 3 to 5 person community keep you from starting.
That's good.
Right?
That's good.
Just get out there and start together. Start with your text group and what's going on with you, and being honest with each other, and taking opportunity to get together and pray for one another and all of that, and let it grow from there. But leave room for other people to join your community, because I believe that community is attractive. And when people see community working in your life, they're going to want to be a part of your community. And so you have to have an open door for people to connect and become kind of one with you. So it's a really beautiful thing. So have a text group to start your community with, but also be very, very open to be connected with whomever God leads. There's some people, if we hadn't had this conversation on community, I had a really interesting event happen. Day before yesterday, I went out to get a salad really quickly for lunch. And it just happened to be that a gentleman was there who I knew from a church that I used to go to. And I was like, oh, hey. And I was going to go sit down by myself and have my focus time to do nothing. And he's like, yeah, come have lunch with me. And I'm like, oh, geez. Here we go to come have lunch. But you know what? I also immediately began to say, what have we been teaching people about community? can I be this way? And so I sat down with him and I had lunch with him and we had a good conversation. But I would have never had done that if we hadn't been talking about community and me having to stop and think for a second. Wait a minute. Maybe God's got something in this. Let's see. And who knows? Robert might become a part of our community at some point in the future. We had a good lunch. He's a nice guy. I don't know, but I'm leaving the door open to build a community and to build a bigger community than even the one that we have. And we'll just see. We'll see how it all plays out and how it works. Does that sound crazy, Lynn?
Not at all. I think that's how it ought to be. Take advantage of the opportunities God gives you, because you can't plan things like that. And, it could have been a time where this man that you met and sat down with lunch was feeling pretty lonely and had asked God, Lord, I don't know what to do. And he reached out. I mean, he could have been afraid to say, have a seat with me, with fear of rejection. And you sat down with him. And maybe that was just God's way of saying, look, you do have people. I do care about you. I do see you. And I think that those opportunities that we can take advantage of, we should. I agree with you. I think that sometimes it's hard to get away from those things. And it's exactly what we were talking about a minute earlier. Selfishness. I want to be alone. Just give me my space. And that's my selfishness. And then, like you were saying, oh, darn, that kind of thing. That was you saying, I just want to be me right now by myself. But we've got to break out of that to accomplish the good that God would have us to accomplish.
If we don't become community builders, then we're really partially missing out on God's plan. Mm-hmm. Because I think God's plan for us is wrapped up in our ability to have community around us. And like I said, from the very beginning, when we started this way, and I wasn't even sure where we were going, but it's the reality that I believe that in the days and weeks ahead, we are going to need one another. We're going to need community. But if you don't have a community, then where does that leave you? A godly, Christian-filled community. And there are other communities out there. There are gangs, and they consider themselves communities. And there are other, groups of people that get together and they, consider themselves community. I will tell you that a community that does not have Christ in its center is just a gathering. It's just a gathering. We need Christ in the center because we're going to need him guiding us as we navigate the curves and winding rocky roads that this day and time are bringing us. I don't know exactly what's ahead, but I don't trust that it's all going to be smooth and bump free. I think we're going to need wisdom from one another. We're going to need opportunities that a member of your group might open up for other members in the group, and it helps to sustain each other and just that kind of thing that's going to be so important in the future. So go build community. Philip, any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
If my wife will cooperate, I would definitely encourage everyone listening. Take some time to think about the folks that God's already brought across your path. It could be, close friends. It could be church people that you know from church. It could be family members. Take the time to think about the people that are currently kind of in your orbit, and just start thinking about how you can reach out to them. If you already know some situations that may be going on in some of their lives, take the time to pray for them. And also don't be shy about sending them a text or something to say, hey, just want you to know I'm praying for you guys, whatever the case is. I guess if you want to boil it down, I'm saying be more intentional about reaching out, be more intentional about getting your mind off yourself, honestly, and putting it on others that God's put into your life or into your path. And I'm telling you, it's almost like there is a relationship between how much you do that type of thing, how much you reach out and get away from yourself, and your happiness level. You know, Jesus said it in John 13. I thought it was fascinating. He was saying to them, I think it was right after the part where he had washed their feet and the whole thing like that. He said, if you know these things, happy are you if you do them. He was telling them right there, hey, get outside of yourself, see what you can do to bless somebody else. If you do that, you'll actually be happy doing it. Somehow, some way, putting down the selfishness that all of us can be prone to, somehow that helps us to gain the happiness we're trying to get by being selfish, if that makes sense. So just some thoughts there, but before my Wi-Fi cuts out again, I'll stop right there.
Lynn, how about you? Final thoughts?
My final thought, go back to that concept of disillusionment. I mean, for me, I think I need to work on godly disillusionment and dropping all the expectations and labels and titles I may assign to people. When I try to make them like me, earlier in the series, you talked about the body and everybody being a member of the body. If I expect everybody to be like me, then we're going to have a body of just a little finger. So to accept everybody and encourage them in the gifts that they have and to drop my expectations of them.
Go build your community. Go find your community. And if you don't have one, maybe it's time for you to start building one. But we need one another. And it's going to become more clear how much we need each other in the days and weeks to come. I honestly wish that Philip and Lynn and Lisa and Ryan and so many others that are part of our community, I wish we all lived in the same neighborhood and could lock the gates out front. and let there's one way in, there, come through the door, and then we could use like Jesus metaphors. But that would be doing too much for me. Sorry I said that. Pray for my strength and my Lord. But man, go out there and build a community. And when you become a part of a community, make sure you become a part that is giving of yourself and pouring out, and learn to just let loose of you and let God do his thing. Remember where one of the places we started was in Acts chapter 2. And it said they were with one accord. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, breaking of bread, and prayer. Look for people that you can give yourselves over to that with and foster a beautiful community together. Now, later on down the road at some point, we're going to continue talking about community, because I want to talk about what it means to be a leader in a community. And so we'll tackle that at some point. But for now, that's going to wrap us up on part 1 of community. And we'll let you know when part 2 is on the way. That's it for tonight, or for today. I am David. That's Philip. This is Lynn. We've enjoyed talking with you and kind of sharing our hearts about this. We always want to hear from you. So if you ever want to share your feedback or thoughts with us, you can use the comment section below on whatever app that you are viewing on. You can also reach us by connecting with us through email. You can go to gotbrew@biblebros.net. That's gotbrew@biblebros.net and reach out to us, and we'll be glad to hear your comments or questions and do our best to answer them. Until next time, it's been our joy and our pleasure, and keep drinking. The coffee also helps to make the community flow. See you then.